Today's demo is another one of the copies I'm doing of Masterworks, trying to improve my pen and ink skills. I have worked in pen and ink for many years, mostly in my illustration work, and I really like it. But you're never too old to learn, and I've been doing this professionally for better than 35 years, and one of the things that keeps what I do being alive and fun is always experimenting and always trying new things and trying to stretch myself as an artist. Now, the materials I'm using, the brush is a Raphael Kolinsky Sable 8404. Honestly, now with I think the embargo or ban on animal hair products, I don't even know if you can get these anymore. If you can, they're wonderful natural hair brushes. Definitely have a greater spring to them. They are superior as far as I can tell, and have been able to tell for, again, 35 years. There's really not a comparison, but regardless of how you feel on the subject, if they're not available, they're not available. So you just have to look for something else. Fortunately, I have a good stash of them, and I'll use them until they're worn out. Later, you'll see that I'm using a pen and a nib. The nib I'm using is a Takikawa. It is a calligraphy nib. I bought it from John Neal Books. They are really nice, very knowledgeable people. So if you do get these nibs, you can't get them from places like Jerry's, Artorama, or Dick Blick, or anything like that. They're just too specialized. So if you're getting that, or the Zebra G, I use that sometimes too. There are a number of good calligraphy nibs, and I just recommend that you get some and try them and see which one you like, because they're very different. Some have more of a spring, some are far stiffer, and just see what you like. The paper I'm using is Strathmore Bristol smooth paper. It's series 300, 100 pound. Calligraphy nibs, Crockwell nibs, they're pretty rough. I mean, they're pretty tough on paper. So you want a good, robust paper that you can really scribble into and have a good time and not worry about tearing a hole in your paper. And believe me, when I'm through with a drawing like this, oh my goodness, I mean, it's just all full of furrows and cuts and things, and you can't see it, but you can definitely feel it. So you really want to have a good heavy paper. A slick paper is what I prefer. And they come in 19 by 24 pads. The sheet that you're seeing is cut in half, so I guess it'd be 19 by 12. You'll also notice that the drawing is done with a green pencil. I recommend highly, if you're going to do pen and ink, do not draw with lead pencil. It's so hard to tell where you inked and where you didn't. And by using a colored pencil, and it doesn't have to be green, I just happen to have a lot of green pencils, but use anything, blue, magenta, red, just anything that really distinguishes itself from the paper, so that you can go in and ink confidently and know where you've inked and not get confused. Because I have inked in the past places erased, and then whole sections weren't done, or it wasn't as heavily done as I thought, and so I had to go in and ink some more. So it's just a time saver and just visually makes it easy. Later you'll see me doing some correcting, and I'm using Montana acrylic markers with golden liquid acrylics in them. I like the Montana markers. Molotow, I think, makes them, and there are probably some others that come empty. And I really like them for correcting. They're fantastic. And contrary to what you hear, you can go on top of an ink drawing with acrylic paint and then ink right on top of it. I haven't had any problem with the ink adhering to the paint and staying there. So don't let yourself get all tensed up and frightened doing pen and ink that if you make a mistake, you've destroyed the drawing. I don't let that bother me at all. I don't care. I will just scribble and draw, and if the nibs, the tines, I think they're called, at the end, if they grab a hold and sling make a spatter, well, a lot of times I'll just leave it. But if it's really annoying me, I'll take my acrylic, go over it, blow dry it, and then come back right on top of it with ink. And I might do that 3 or 4 times. A lot of times I do pen and ink like this. I do it as if I treat it like a painting where I'm just doing layers. And so I'll put ink down, and I don't like that. Okay, well, go over it with acrylic paint and then lift it up, or not lift it up, but go over it and with ink, and if I still don't like it a whole lot, put some more paint down and go back and forth. Now, I do recommend, if you do that, use something like Sumi ink that's got the shellac in it, or Higgins Black Magic. Those have shellac, and so they will dry fairly impermeable to water. So I wouldn't recommend doing it with, say, something like Higgins Eterna, which is a good ink. Eterna is a good ink, and I actually use it in my paint brush that I have, the portable brush that I have. But the problem is, you try to go on top of it with paint, and a lot of times it'll kind of reactivate, and so it's doable, but it's just a mess sometimes. So I try to avoid it. Now, technique-wise, it may feel like I'm sort of jumping around, and to a certain extent I am, but what I'm really trying to do is establish the shadows, establish the shadow patterns. It's, I think, a real mistake to go light to dark with pen and ink, because it will make for very often an overly rendered image that just doesn't have a good, strong, confident feel and is easily overworked. And so if you go in as you would with oils, as I do even with watercolor, I don't really work light to dark. I work either from the middle out, or I actually put down the shadows and start going back and forth. But in this, definitely having those sort of shadow patterns established with the brush, with nice, thick, bold, gestural strokes, then I can go in and start fleshing that out with the nib. Now, this is a pretty flexible nib, so it will allow you to go from a real thin line, certainly not as thin as a croquis, but from a thin line to a fairly thick line as well. So what I like about that is that it gives me the ability to go from the white paper into my shadows and kind of work back and forth, creating a transition from one to the other. These Takikawas also, they hold a lot of ink, and that's real nice. I don't mind dipping. Sometimes it can get to be a little bit annoying, but also it can be good in that it sort of makes you stop, think, look at what you're doing for a second, and take a breath, and then go back. But, I mean, my goodness, you don't want to just do that any more than you have to. So you want something that's really going to hold a lot of ink and make it where you can work for a little bit and make some really thick patterns or thick strokes. Now, in this case, you look and you see that Gibson, very much his strokes are going with the hair, and that's what I'm doing. But sometimes you'll cross against it just to add a little bit of shading. As I work, another reason to have a smooth paper and a really thick paper is that when I start hatching or doing some other techniques, then I'll scribble that brush or that nib around, and instead of going backwards, I'm going forward, actually pushing the nib forward, which, of course, it's going to grab the paper and probably cut into it and everything. Well, that's okay. I mean, that makes for a very lively technique. And you can see also, sometimes I'm having trouble, and I learned something that I did not know just this week. I called John Neal Books, and I told him, I like the Takigawa, and I also bought your Zebra G's, and I had something else. And I said, honestly, I just don't like the other two. I can't get them to hold the ink. They just sort of beat up on the nib, and then when I go to put it down on the paper, it just all blobs out. And the guy talked to me for a little while. He said, well, what are you doing? And I said, well, how are you preparing them? And I told him, well, I'm going in and I'm heating them up with a lighter, like on every video that I see when they're talking about nibs and how to first start getting a nib to work. Every single one of them says to get a lighter, burn the end or heat the end up and burn all the oils off. And the guy, John Neal, he said, that may be your problem because we don't recommend that anymore. That has been sort of the old school way of doing it, but we're finding that it doesn't work as well, and it can also be deleterious to the life of the nib, that it can shorten its life. So what they recommend now is to go in, and I kid you not, they tell you to take a potato and stick your nibs very carefully into the potato, and that what did he say? Was it the starches? The starches that are in the potato will eat away the oils that are on the nibs and make them better, more receptive to the ink. Well, you got to do something. You've got to get that oil off. When you first get them, I guess they're treated to keep them from rusting or tarnishing or something. And so you got to do something. So you have to clean them either with soap and water or with the starch or with the heat. And they're recommending the starch on the potato. I'm going to the grocery store in a couple of days, and as soon as the nibs that I've ordered come in, well, I'm going to try it. But the ones I've got now, well, they've been sort of heat treated, and we'll just see. I'll just live with them as they are because I don't have any potatoes. But maybe I'll make a video of that and let's see what happens. But yeah, you can see now. Hopefully what I've been doing has made sense with the hair, that I've established the darks and then going in with the lights and trying to make a transition. Now you can see that with the forehead and the eye socket, that I'm going in and being, in this case, a little more careful, shading it in. I sort of fluctuate. Okay, you see that big blob that just came off the tip of the nib? Well, okay. A lot of people would panic. I'm letting it dry. I think now I am dabbing it up a little bit because I don't want to just get my hand in it and smear it around, which I've done. And if I do, then okay, I just, again, put acrylic paint over it and fix it. I don't want to make a mess if I don't have to, but messes happen. And I'm just not going to spend my time living on edge, fearful that I'm going to mess something that's irreplaceable and unfixable. I'm just not going to do it. So I have personally gravitated toward techniques that allow me to not necessarily be sloppy, because I'm not sloppy, but not worry about that stuff. And if you see some of my pen and ink drawings, you'll see there's spatters on. Sometimes there's spatters on them. There's sometimes I've got fingerprints and palm prints where I got some ink on my palm and it dabbed down. Well, if you sort of do that organically and just let it happen, then sometimes you can actually go in and kind of tweak it a little bit and add to it, and it adds to the charm of the drawing. It makes it just looks like a drawing. And so I kind of like to let that just be a part of it and not get all exercised over it. I think later in the drawing, as I go in with a brush again, I probably go over that and one blob and sort of blend it in so that you don't see it that much. But that's a perfect example of what I talk about, just being laid back, sort of letting your medium kind of paint itself, sort of letting happy accidents happen and sometimes not so happy accidents happen, and just going with it. And you can see here I've got that Montana marker, and you just push the nib in at the tip, and that'll sort of activate, let paint flow down into it. It's a hard nib. It's not soft. It's a hard plastic. But do that and sort of let the ink flow in, or the paint flow in. And so I did that. Sometimes I'll blow dry it. If it's not where I think I'd put my hand, I'll let it dry naturally and work in another area. And around the perimeter of the hair, that's where at the end I start kind of going outside the lines, going outside the basic shapes. That way you get the feeling of hair, of it being organic. Because hair is always going to have a couple of little frizzies that poke out or are wispy and get caught with the air. Okay, well, that's about it for this one. I enjoyed it. I really learned a lot. I hope you did, and I'll be doing others in the future. If you've enjoyed this episode of The Arthropologist, please hit the like button. And if you'd like to see more episodes like this, think about subscribing. I'm Bill Wilson, and I'm The Arthropologist.